let me start by setting the context for this talk, keeping in mind that I know that I'm talking to adults learning mathematics, but my work is with parents. So I've been working with parents, mostly mothers of Mexican origin, for over 25 years. And usually, being parents, they join the workshops as parents. That is, they want to help their children. But then they start engaging as adult learners very, very soon. And so my focus is going to be on the implications from this work for adult learning. So my theoretical framework, as Judy says, I mean, yes, a lot of my work comes out of the work that I did in Funds of Knowledge, because I was fortunate enough to join the Funds of Knowledge for Teaching project when I came to University of Arizona in the very early 90s. And so I just put one definition of Funds of Knowledge that is widely used, but it's the idea that communities, families, have knowledge, have experiences, have mostly the resources that they can use and that they use to get ahead and to thrive. And that really, from the point of view of Funds of Knowledge for the school, it is, when you look at it from the point of view of the schools, not so much for the adult learners, but it's the same idea, that we need to have the schools tapping onto that knowledge that the families have. Then building on the Funds of Knowledge, there is the concept of parents as intellectual resources that myself and my colleague Rosie Andrade developed, which is the idea that we need to value the knowledge that parents can bring to the school. Now, you can certainly translate all of this, of course, to adults as adult learners. And then another component of my research is informed by situated cognition and ethnomathematics, and I'm referring now to the introduction, in the chapter of numeracy as social practice by Yasukawa et al., where they explain the different, some of the different theories behind adult learning. So in this talk, I'd like to highlight two areas. One, I'm going to talk about parents as facilitator of workshops for other parents, because I think that there are implications here where adult learners could become facilitators of activities for other adult learners. And then the second one is parents drawing on their Funds of Knowledge, everyday experiences, ethnomathematics, depending on which lens you are taking, to explore mathematical tasks. I'm going to start with the first one. So as part of a project that is here, the website, and I can put it in the chat eventually. Actually, right now is a bit clumsy for me to use the chat, but I can do that later. We develop a series of materials for K4, sorry, I'm using the terminology, for teachers in elementary, in middle school, in a little bit in high school, though less, and parents to work together. And one of the modules that we developed is this one called My Giant, which was intended for mostly children in middle school, so that would be probably ages 11, 13, it has to do with proportional reasoning. And so My Giant is one that you may have seen. And so the teams facilitating these workshops sometimes had mothers and teachers, or parents and teachers. Sometimes they had parents, teachers, and a school administrator. This particular team that I'm referring to is interesting in that it had 3 mothers, then one mentor who was a mother who had been participating in the project longer, and one coordinator who was also a mother. So there were no teachers involved, okay, in this particular team. And so the giant has to do with this idea that a giant has come visit you and has left these big footprints. And so, we will stage it with big footprints in the classroom or in the room or in the library, wherever we were doing the project, right, the activity. And then one of the activities was they had to figure out the height of the giant. But for example, to start or to launch it, they would talk about, pretend that the giant is going to visit your home. What items would you need? What size would the items need to be? And so the mother who was presenting, she started talking about teacups and chairs. And she was just talking about, think of items in your house that maybe you have to adapt when your kids were younger. So she was bringing up examples to make it more real for the families attending the workshop. Okay, so the interesting part is the debriefing of the workshop. That's what I wanted to share with you. So after each workshop, the teams meet to debrief, and Darla, one of the mothers who had been presenting, starts by reflecting on how parents are likely to know about adjusting recipes, because they had talked, that is something that leads to proportional reasoning. And so this is part of the dialogue. Darla says, so I think that if we can give a couple more examples of maybe adjusting a recipe, it may help to connect a little better. Marisa, another mother, at the beginning or at the end. Gillian, the mentor, says either. Then Darla says, I don't know that I will do it at the beginning. And at the same time, Gillian is saying at the end. And then Darla says, because we are wanting them to guess. And if we give them something right away, they are not going to be using their imagination. They'll go, well, according to that, pointing to an imaginary chart paper where the information would be. So let's think about this. These are parents that technically, they don't have any formal education background necessarily, right? They're not teachers. That's not their job to be teachers. But I found Darla's comment extremely insightful, right? I mean, you want the adults, the parents or the adult learners to think about the problem. If we give them something right away, then they're not going to use their imagination anymore. So the recipes would come at the end. It will make more sense for the recipes to come at the end. Okay. So I thought that was really, as I said, a very insightful comment. Then, continuing with the debriefing, they had a debriefing guidelines. And Gillian, the mentor, says, did we follow the module? And she starts laughing because they hadn't followed the module as written, right? So it says, did we follow the model as it was presented to you during your training session? If not, comment. And they are laughing. They're all laughing and whatever. And so then Gillian says, but you know what? You have to modify to the people you have. And with her hands, she's indicating both the team who is presenting and the audience. The audience is no longer there, right? It's just debriefing afterwards. Because if you make it so mundane, it's a math class, nanny, you're not going to get much response. But if people go out and say, we went to this module and it was so much fun, and some of the people, and she's talking about the presenters, some of the people were really goofy and they didn't get it, and they were fine to say that they didn't understand it, I think they would have more fun. So again, think about it, the power of having adult learners co-presenting or presenting to other adult learners. So for me, the implications for adult education here are, well, parents or adults want to be heard and share their experiences and knowledge of mathematics. What if we have adult learners teaching adult learners in a similar way to what we did in this project with parents? And so, as Gillian said in an interview, the whole point of MAPS is the name of the project, the whole point of MAPS was for parents to come in and teach math to other parents, so they wouldn't feel so uncomfortable or intimidated by teachers. Teachers can come in and teach, that's what they do. But when you have another parent teaching you, it's special, you can absorb a lot more. So again, I'm thinking of the potential here for having the adults presenting to other adult learners. So now I'm going to put you in breakout rooms in a second, but I need to do something on the chat. Okay, I have the chat ready. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go into breakout groups for about maybe 20 minutes or so, maybe. And I'm switching now to the second topic. So what I'd like you to discuss is, how can you learn about your students' funds of knowledge, everyday experiences? What have you tried? And also, what kinds of tasks have you used that provide students with an opportunity to draw on their everyday knowledge? And what I thought we could do is that we could use Padlet, and I'm pasting the Padlet in the chat right now. Okay, for some reason, it's not letting me do it as a link, but that's weird because it usually works. But you can just, oh, here it is. Got it. Okay, so now you have the Padlet there, and I'm going to create the breakout groups. So in the Padlet, you can actually write your thoughts, and the two questions are there. So how can you learn about your students' funds of knowledge? And what kinds of tasks have you used that provide students with an opportunity to draw on their everyday knowledge? And I should say that there is another column in that Padlet. We might or might not get to it later on. That's why it's there. Okay, it looks like everybody's back. So I'll go back to the rest of my talk because. And so now, these are some examples from my work that have some connection to hopefully the discussions that you were having. So, for example, the observation of a seamstress, and another example with the wrenches. So we had a father who brought a bunch of wrenches and then using them to discuss fractions, because they go in fractions of an inch. Something with recipes. The most recent one being something around making tamales, the Mexican food, very important in the Mexican community. And then the papel picado. Papel picado, this is an example of papel picado. These are some examples. These are examples made, well, the uglier they look is probably made by me. So I will assume that this one on the right is probably the one made by me because I'm totally clueless. The mothers were teaching me how to make the papel picado. And then I'm kind of wondering, I'm sure there is a lot of obviously symmetry and things about mathematics here and better. And so now think about it, this is a craft that they use. So we could be doing such a rich mathematical explorations with this. Now, another activity I've done more recently, and is a very quick activity, and I know many of you may have seen it, and it's brief, but it brings up an interesting discussion, which is sharing pictures from their context and then the mathematics they see in them. So for me, for this talk, of course, this is a picture that we've used. I'm in the Southwest, I'm in Arizona. So here is a saguaro cactus for you to observe. And so then, the idea will be, what mathematical questions can you bring, does this bring to mind? How could you find out? And so then we asked the mothers to do the same thing recently, more recent project. And so by bringing these pictures, it provides an entry into their world, both the real world and mathematical. So for example, one of the mothers shared a picture of a park where she and her son go for walks. And she also shared a picture of her son, and this is the picture, holding a plate full of vegetables from their garden. And then she said that she asked some questions of, the child and the vegetable garden and all that. And another mother shared a picture of people making a human structure. It was a very unique human structure that she had found somewhere. It wasn't so much about her own experience, but something that had caught her attention. So now we're going to look at a couple of, recent examples. So this is from one of my grad students' master's thesis. And we use this example that comes from the Project Mars. And so the graph is what you see. I mean, that's we didn't change it. But we asked them to write a story that would correspond to this graph in any way that they wanted, and that they didn't have to use the axes as they were labeled. Okay, so they could do whatever they wanted. So what I was going to do on the Padlet, and you're more than welcome to do it on the Padlet if you want, because you have the link, or we could do it on the chat. I'm just kind of curious if you would like to spend maybe a couple of minutes or so. What may be a story that goes with this graph? Again, remembering that it doesn't have to be time and distance from home. I mean, if you want, you can do that. But believe me, the mothers totally ignore the time and distance from home, well, particularly one of the labels. So I'll give you a couple of minutes and you can either use the Padlet, or, because we're not going to go into breakout rooms because that would, require, going back and forth, or you can use the chat if you want. Just be as creative as you want as to what could be. And of course, if you're going to write you don't need to label the axis at all, as Anne is saying, but what kind of a story would you use? All right, you can of course continue writing, but I'm just going to go ahead and, so this is what the mothers did. They did one about cooking rice. And so Magali, one of the mothers, she says, well, I was thinking that at room temperature, then you're heating it, okay, it's starting to get warmer. And then here, number 3, it's already boiling. Here you have to lower the flame to the lowest level, because if you don't, it will get burned, okay? Well, so, and I'm just giving you a summary, obviously, but this was a joint creation with the among the different mothers, right? And so there were some issues about the axis and the labels. So what is being labeled here? So like here, for example, okay, that was time. We were pretty clear here, but it wasn't clear. So for the y-axis, was it the temperature? Was it the stages? Was it the water evaporating? It wasn't, you know, there was some discussion on that. Let's see, sorry. So, you know, evaporated water and time, for example, it seemed like it was. Then the problem with the 2 cups of water, by this I mean that there was some discussion that it looks like they were saying that by number 3, most of the water had evaporated in a very quick time. So then the mother started saying, well, yeah, that will be my case, because when I put it, the water is already hot. And then other mother would say, oh no, I do it at room temperature. So then I went on this discussion about how to cook rice, basically, right? That was mostly the discussion on sharing. And the grad student at the time, when she reflected on that, she thought that it was like off-topic conversation. And then we discussed that, and I says, no, it's not off-topic. It's happening in the natural. That's how they're making sense of a problem, you know. So what might look like off-topic, it was actually constructing and coming to some kind of agreement. There was a lot of confusion as to what the last segment meant, because it wasn't clear what was going on here. There is no water or what's happening, but then what's happening during 6? I mean, because there was some water here. So there was basically some confusion, because probably maybe the graph didn't quite fit what they were trying to do, but, you know, the scenario was chosen by the mothers, and it was such that they could all contribute. Then independently, they each chose scenario for the story. And these are some examples. So one of them, and this is very interesting, the mother in the group, this was a small group of mothers. I think we had 6 that day. It was 6, yeah. One of the one that was the most, who had the highest level of formal education, works not as an accountant, but she works in some kind of business with imports and exports. And she's usually the one who will follow more the school template. And so she's the one who wrote a story that was the closest to what the axis show, the time and the distance. So she basically wrote a story that fit the graph. Another mother wrote a graph about a plant from seed to dying. So first it grows, and then eventually it dies, and it becomes again a seed. That was her story. And then the one that we all really thought that it was very funny, going to church and the peacefulness level. Because basically, let me see if I can reproduce it. I don't have, but basically she said that as she's approaching church, her level of peacefulness is like increasing, right? And then here she's at the maximum of peacefulness, but then it goes down, because then it was time to get out of the church and go to a restaurant with the family for breakfast, or go home and start dealing with the home routines, and boom, the peacefulness is gone. So something along those lines. So we thought it was very creative interpretation of the graph. And if you're more interested in this, I mean, the grad student has a paper on this, and I'm trying to encourage her now to write it for publication also. But anyway, so that was one example. And another example, my last example, that has to do with drawing on their knowledge, is around math modeling. So math modeling, it's very interesting, I think, for adult learning, because the open-endedness of math modeling and its contextualized nature at the same time, it makes for great opportunities for math explorations that draw on forms of knowledge. Also, I think that modeling can help address the tension between in-school and out-of-school mathematics. So what we did is we interviewed the mothers to find out about their hobbies and interests. And from there, we found out that a couple of them made paper flowers. Not this kind of paper flowers that you see here. This is the one that we use for the activity, because a grad student found a way to make paper flowers, and we used that. But there was a connection to something, that a craft that they were familiar with. And so we prepare a paper flower task, and this is the way it was presenting. Your school wants to decorate a wall with paper flowers for a back to school display, and you volunteer to design the display and buy tissue paper. How many packages of tissue paper do you need to buy to decorate the wall with paper flowers? Draw diagrams, state the total number of flowers, if you wasted any paper, and your assumptions. So for example, an assumption was that one team, they really took it serious that they're being hired by a client who wanted nice displays and efficient, no waste of paper or time. So they concentrated on that, and they chose large flowers because it saves time and it fills more, okay? So these are some examples. So we gave them information on the cost and the amount of tissue paper from different stores in town, and or online, I mean, you know. And then these are an example of how they were designing the mothers. This is work from them, you know. So a big flower, 16 by 12, the middle one will be 12 by 8, and the small ones will be 6 by 8. Yeah. So they had different size, shapes, and thickness for aesthetic appeal. Then, of course, the different size of rectangles. There was a lot of, in terms of mathematics, the geometry, the measurement, the optimization, and different amounts of flowers and designs. And what was the best display? How are we going to? So the mothers were the experts here. And then an interesting thing happened. So they did that, but two of the mothers who are related, they are sisters-in-law, they took it one step further, and they took it back home, and they involved their, you know, the husbands and kids and all that, because they did the following. They created an altar in their community, and they wanted, and they made a frame. So the man in the family made the frame out of wood. And so this is the copy. I mean, this is not the frame, but this is an idea of what the frame would look like. And then they decorated it with flowers. And in doing that, it led to a discussion of how do you measure, I mean, not for the actual doing of the frame. They knew how to make the frame. But in class, when they were discussing it with us, they wanted to know how to measure the hypotenuse, so line here. And so that got us to a discussion of the theorem of Pythagoras. I mean, you know, because one of the mothers vaguely remembered, and one of the mothers had a daughter who was in college. And so the daughter told her about the theorem of Pythagoras, okay? And so we had a big discussion on this, about how, and another mother says, yeah, because I know that if I walk like this and like this, it's going to be shorter if I go like this, but how much shorter? So there was all this intuitive knowledge, and here is a copy of the altar. I took out of respect, I took out the images that they had, so I only left the frame. But here they had, of course, images from a religious altar. But that's what they did. So that is actually a picture that they gave us, you know, that shows in their neighborhood. They built it there. Okay. So that was an example that took us completely like, whoa, you know, we were not expecting this one. And so they made the flowers, which they had learned how to make in the workshop that we were doing. And then they basically used it, yeah, and they involved the whole family. And again, that's very important for them to have the whole family involved. So that was a way that everybody could participate. So what have I learned? Parents enjoy doing mathematics and want to learn about the mathematics their children are learning and beyond. And that's when they become adult learners. So yes, again, the motivation is their children, but you know, parents can be very effective facilitators of workshops for other parents. They connect with them, they share their trepidation, they can bring a more informal way of interacting about mathematics. Again, what better way to learn than to teach, right? We've all experienced that. When we teach is when we learn. So having adult learners co-teaching or teaching can actually be very powerful. And last but not least, parents, like everybody else, may have strong beliefs about what is mathematics, about the proper way to do it. And that reinforces that mathematics is not culture free. I haven't talked about the beliefs that they bring in. I've written about this elsewhere, but obviously I wanted to bring it up So to close, I just want to share a couple of comments from mothers over the years. I went through my whole life being told how things were in math and not given any freedom to figure it out on my own. This is reflecting after having participated in projects, with us. I get excited because now I know. I'm not accepting it. Now I know why that is the way it is. And with this, I think that it's time for questions and